Welcome to another edition of Capital Tiger Bay Club. We're certainly glad you're here. I'm Gil Ziffer. I'm president of Capital Tiger Bay. This is a timely program as we get near the end of our legislative session. I know everybody is, like me, really glad the legislature's still here, doing all their good work. This is the Mayor of Tallahassee, John Daly, something very important he wanted to announce.
And now a special message from the city of Tallahassee. Hi, this is Mayor John Daly, and I'm proud to announce a new vision for Tallahassee's favorite former mall. We are going to create a new kind of cultural center at the Northwood Mall that will make everyone jump for joy. We've got 50-cent wings and spandex for days at the only municipal-owned Hooters in America. Don't forget 2-for-1 margaritas at El Jalisco and the best spicy bean dip in town. Don't miss out on your state worker settlement discount. We've got coffee shops, a pizza place, gymnasiums, and the Tallahassee Ballet. Not to mention the brand new North Florida Bat Zoo. Car shows, boat shows, and tractor pulls. We can host roller derby, drone racing, and mud wrestling. Did I mention we are bringing back the Silver Slipper? Not even Jeremy Matlow will want to skip out on this. Human safety, we will build a police station there, complete with the nation's first urban decay tactical training center. My colleagues and I see a parking lot filled with car washes, swap meets, and seasonal pumpkin patches. This is how we show the world who we really are, folks. The Northwood Mall holds a special place in all our hearts, and as your mayor, I'm committed to bringing the glory back just in time for our upcoming bicentennial. So come on down to North Monroe Street and soak up all the best that an all-American city has to offer. Woo!
Thank you, Mayor, for providing that and also having a fabulous sense of humor to sit through that. Just to mention, and for those of us that have some history here, John also was a big part of the county when they bought the Winn-Dixie shopping center, as I recall, way up on North Monroe. So this may tell us something about the future. Tallahassee Mall, Governor Square, you never know where it might end. Anyways, we're glad that you're here. We hope you enjoyed that little bit of humor that we provided. In the spirit of moving the program forward, I'm now going to introduce Christina Johnson, who will introduce our speaker. Christina?
Thank you. Well, that is a hard act to follow. You're right. I'll try my best. Well, our guest today has broken a significant number of eggs in the Capitol Press Corps basket with his product lines and business model, but he said that is what it takes to make a really disruptive omelet. Our business of politics and the coverage of it changed vastly from basic websites 20 years ago to our sometimes all too instant communication via social media and traditional site. Undoubtedly, the news cycle is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you know social media is overwhelming when political operatives like Steve Shell give up Twitter and Facebook for Lent. Our overwhelming presence today has developed our speaker's FloridaPolitics.com website and its many offspring of products into a Florida information force to be reckoned with. He's been tagged as a cross between Lee Atwater and Boss Hogg. I prefer to think of him a little bit more of a cross between that adorable Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Freddy Krueger. You may not love him, you may hate him, but you cannot ignore him, and the Florida polls that do ignore him find themselves seriously out of the key information flow. Kevin Cate does an annual survey of legislative aides asking their bosses, senators and Florida House members, what they read, watch, and listen to daily. Over 70%, and that's the #1 position, said their bosses read FloridaPolitics.com, even ahead of Facebook and Twitter and Politico Florida. Local newspaper websites came in about 50%, and national newspapers and talk radio were in the 30s. So he's got their attention, and he has yours. You can start your day with his popular Sunburned morning newsletter. be updated throughout the day and in real time, or examine his specialty products focused on DC, Jacksonville, Central Florida, and his beloved Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg. A face for blogs, Peter and his team of journalists puts out Sunburn, which comes out weekly by 6 a.m., 60 Days, which comes out by about 6 p.m. during the 60-day legislative session. There's Takeaway in Tallahassee, which hitting inboxes Saturday mornings. And then now we just have a Sunday brunch, which is a recap. So we are informed every single minute of the day. Not to mention his quarterly magazine Influence and his newly unveiled podcast, He Said, She Said, with his wife Michelle. In fact, if it wasn't for Michelle, he'd still be riding a motorcycle selling ads for Adam Smith at the St. Pete Times. Yes, there are those that do not care for his advertising, and more than one unkind comparative reference to Charles Foster Kane has been made. We can imagine he will say things today that will be news to you, or make news for you, or maybe just make you mad. So let's all bend the knee, because we're now in the room where it's about to happen. Get ready to get insulted. But we at Capital Tiger Bay are proud that we didn't pay, but he came to play anyway. Please welcome Peter Schorsch.
Your invoices just went out. How much time do I have, by the way? Okay, and then questions at the end? Good. Hey, you're lucky I showed up. I was on Silver Airways. That's a 50-50 gamble one way or another. Let's turn this off, right? We can only really go to 115 or 120 because the few people that in here actually work for a living, unlike Barney Bishop, have to get over there for budget appropriations meetings at 1:30. So I won't take too much of your time. I do thank you very much for inviting me. I love Tiger Bays. I was a board member of the Suncoast Tiger Bay in Tampa Bay. We would never get this kind of attendance for any of our speakers. We would still get the same percentage of senior citizens and retired people, but we would just not get as many of you. I don't know if you guys have a better bus system to the nursing homes, but we would never do as well. So I am a big believer. I come home, I have a prize collection of Fang and Claw awards for the toughest questions, asking politicians at that, so I really appreciate being here with you all. I think Jeff saw a column and invited me about that, but I do have some comments about the media I'd like to start with. We'll talk about Amendment 4 and the initiative process, which is being debated. We'll make fun of some Republicans at the end so that I don't piss you all off. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about making fun of you, so hang on for that as well. I've got notes, but I don't even know why I'm going off of them. So there's this wonderful movie called Adaptation. It starred Nicolas Cage. It is a kind of a meta film about writing. He is playing Charlie Kaufman, who's a famous Hollywood screenwriter, for any of you who watch it. He runs into, he's writing a book, or an adaptation of Susan Orlean's The Orchard Thief, which is a very difficult book and doesn't lend itself to a movie. And so he kind of runs into writer's block. And so while he's in New York, he goes to see like a symposium being given by Robert McKee, who is a famed Hollywood screenwriter. And Nicolas Cage, playing kind of the dorky Charlie Kaufman, asks, hey, what happens if you have a story and nothing happens? And McKee, and it's a beautiful clip that's worth kind of looking at on YouTube just to get yourself fired up. He says, are you out of your mind? People are murdered every day. There's genocide, war, corruption. Every day, somewhere in the world, somebody sacrifices his life to save someone else. Every day, someone somewhere takes a conscious decision to destroy someone else. People find love, they lose it. And for Christ's sake, a child watches her mother beaten to death on the step of the church. Someone goes hungry, someone betrays his best friend for a woman. If you can't find that stuff in life, then my friend, I don't know why I'm wasting my 2 hours with you. That's how I feel about the Florida Capitol Press Corps. Why am I wasting my time? Why are they wasting your time? You all are political aficionados, and I think that you all probably are their base in a way. But the journalism that you are reading and watching is completely different than what it was a decade ago, 2 decades ago, when you all got started. Dominic got started. I don't even think they had taxes. I think Matthew was collecting them it was Florida Tax Watch by Matthew. In 2000, there were more than 100 reporters covering the legislative session. In 2010, there were 40 reporters covering the legislative session. Going into this session, there's about the same amount of reporters, but the majority of those reporters work for news organizations that are subscription-based and are really only affordable to the legal, lobbying, and public affairs firms looking to influence the session. The journalism is for those who can pay for it. To keep track of the Capitol Press Corps, you don't need a guide from the House Clerk's office. You need a missing persons report. This is the first legislative session that you will not have reporting, full-time reporting, from Steve Bosquet, Mark Caputo, Rick Flagg, who just got laid off 2 weeks ago in the middle of session with no notice. Mary Ellen Class, a lot of you may not even realize that yet. Mary Ellen Class or Adam Smith. That's 165 years of journalism experience taken out of the equation. Now, I don't blame the reporters, not at all. Florence Snyder, who I know a lot of you all know, she always would tell me, don't blame the reporters, blame the editors, blame the bosses. And so I do blame the corporate overlords, not for making hard business decisions, but for making bad business decisions. Political journalism, good, solid reporting from the campaign trail to the Capitol could be a moneymaker. Yet the USA Today network, which owns, among other newspapers, the Tallahassee Democrat, sent one of its political reporters to Louisiana to cover news there at the beginning of the legislative session. The USA Network has still not replaced the single Capitol reporter it had that was representing the Naples Daily News or the TC Palm. Gatehouse, which owns big newspapers like the Jacksonville Times-Union and the Palm Beach Post, and they employ a great reporter, John Kennedy. But let me tell you something, what Senate Appropriations Chairman Rob Bradley tweeted out. And this was a remarkable conversation that happened in real time. And I know a few of you aren't on the Twitters, but if you want to find out what's really going on, sign up, because people like Rob Bradley say these things. He was talking on, I think it was the Sunday that a big Associated Press story came out talking about news deserts, where that there isn't a newspaper within 25 miles of a small town. He says it's not, this is his tweet, so it's not perfect English. It's not just small towns. Our region has 0 reporters in Tallahassee for session. Session started on Tuesday. I don't think Travis Cummings, at Aaron Bean, at Travis Hudson, or I have spoken to a single Times Union reporter about it. Occasional, untimely AP News Service of Florida stories, reprint in the TU is it. This is the chief budget writer in the legislature, and he is saying no one from the newspaper in the state's largest city has come to talk to him about, this big issue, the $90 billion budget that he and his Clay County compatriot, Travis Cummings, are about to write. This is what brings me back to the quote from McKee. It's what I was thinking about last night, about every day someone makes a conscious decision to destroy someone else's life. Is there any other way to describe the legislative process? And that's why I tell my reporters, and I think we actually, Jacob Ogles in the back here, found this guy. This is a great story. This is just, I think David Johnson knows this a little bit just because I think you really like his work. This guy's writing for the Sarasota, the SRQ magazine. We make a decision. News Service of Florida, Politico Florida, and basically every other reporter head for the bar on Friday at about 4:30, 5 o'clock. In Florida, a weekend is just another news day. especially during the campaign trail. And so while we had all these news reporters working Monday through Friday, and me trying to just grind them up and shorten their life expectancy by working 14 or 16 hours a day in this terrible gig economy, I said, why don't we have a weekend reporter? So we hired Jacob Ogles, and it was something that added 20% to our site traffic. Just by saying, on Saturday and Sunday, we're gonna have a guy write stories about what Marco Rubio says to meet the press, or if there's a campaign meeting on a Saturday for the agriculture commissioner. And so he pumps out 8, 10, 12 stories a week, or on the weekend, maybe more if I'm lucky and if he's feeling generous. But that's just one little small business decision that we made that expanded so that FloridaPolitics.com is the most read news site in the political journalism world. So I tell my reporters, like Jacob, and it's a mantra over and over again, every bill, is a story, period. Every amendment filed is a story. Every appropriation is a story. If I had enough reporters, I would write a story about every bill, amendment, and appropriation. The lobbying business is a $750 million industry. I mean, look at Barney Seuss. And by the way the Tallahassee Democrat covers it, you think they were covering the hepatitis outbreak. Mind you, I do believe the Democrat, I just want to put in my plug, I think that they've done a much better job under Skip Foster and Bill Hatfield. I don't want to take away from it. I think their local reporting, especially on rooting out the corruption at City Hall, has been excellent. But then again, the bar that they set was not high. I was looking back at a great story that Tom O'Hara, who is the husband of Rosemary O'Hara, who is the editorial page editor of the Sun Sentinel, one of the last great editorial pages in the state. And he noted that when the Democrat, and I didn't know this, they didn't have a full-time government reporter, but they did have a reporter covering Bob Gabordy's exercise program. And I didn't know that. And that is remarkable to me. And so I think about it, is there any other business in this town that generates as much revenue as politics, yet receives as little attention as politics? Now, all of this is just the beginning of my complaints. I have a lot of complaints, so you people just get ready for it. We're just talking about coverage of the legislative session. You want to know what is a real dog's breakfast? Coverage of Florida political campaigns. That is what coverage there is of them. You know, up here, this is the fishbowl. You can get all those reporters in the gallery looking down on the 120 members of the House, of the 40 members of the Senate. God forbid any of them gave up a Saturday to come down to Tampa or Mayaca City or South Florida and cover a special election or a campaign. They know nothing about these folks once they get up here because they have spent no time on the campaign trail. You know, what a newspaper does is they look around and they say, hey, what are you doing, John? Oh, you were the weekend features reporter. You know what? We got a special election over here in South Pinellas. You're on that. Man, I'm fired up. This is how, I am fired. This is how, and Christina kind of ruined it for me. This is how you know the Capitol Press Corps is broken. It is the KCOM survey, and it is say that we are the #1 outlet for lawmakers' information. Not only that, our email, Sunburn, which goes out at 4 a.m., which I know this crowd is absolutely up by that time. We're #6 also. There are people that literally say they go to the throne and they start the day reading that 10,000-word screed that I put out every night. And I think that is very indicative of what's wrong with the press corps. I never wanted to be #1. I shouldn't be #1. We're not authoritative. I barely copy edit, and yet we're #1. But the 160 lawmakers up there carving up a $90 billion budget, they start their day reading our Sunburn, and they go to bed checking our Twitter account. And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what does. So that's my screed against local media. I do, and I actually, for those of you that are on Twitter, I put this out right before, I know that some of you are. I put this out right now as I was walking in the room. Look at the front pages of the major newspapers right this moment. the Tallahassee Democrat first and foremost. I took 4 screen grabs. There is not one single story on its website, on the front page of its website, that has the words bill or legislation in there. This is the capital of Florida, the state's 3rd largest town, and there's not one story about one piece of pending legislation up on that news site right now. There's one story about DeSantis complaining about something, and there's some other story, but there are stories about whatever Daley's doing out at some old dilapidated mall or something like that, and whatever the hell Gillum is still doing, as if that guy just won't go away. But there's not one single story about the legislation, about the legislature, which, back in the day, back when Barney was the top lobby, and I just keep hitting Barney, I don't mean to do this. Back when there wasn't the gift ban, back when you could go to Silver Slipper and not worry about people like me tweeting out that they saw you there. This town ran about on the legislature. So I'd like to go into my second little round of comments, which is, I think we are in kind of happy days are here again. I think it's important to note just how much Rick Scott sucked the life out of this town over the last 8 years. And I am not a Rick Scott, I'm neither a Rick Scott fan or a Rick Scott critic. I actually organized the first protest of Rick Scott. We booed him on opening day in St. Petersburg. He threw out the first pitch. It was epic. I mean, you should go listen to it on YouTube, because have you ever seen a person run from the mound to the off of the field quicker? I don't think any baseball player has. But we booed him because he was talking. I remember how wonderful Rick Scott was when he decided to cut funding for people with special needs on the day he went to the ribbon cutting for the Special Olympics, and I thought that was particularly kind of him. Now, I've become more of a Rick Scott apologist. I do think he understands the state better than some of the people that we all hold in high accord. I worked for Governor Askew. I thought he's one of the greatest Floridians of the century. But I think we had a false ideal of what Florida was going to become, that it was going to be some sort of like we were going to have a Virginia or North Carolina education system. I think what Rick Scott realizes is that we're basically a second world economy with a second world democracy. And we are basically Brazil next to Georgia. And I think he recognized that better than other people, and that's why he pushed people to community colleges. That's why he was so invested in doing ribbon cuttings at Wawa's. His goals were not aspirational, they were pragmatic. You can acknowledge that, you can criticize that, you can fight against that, but that was also, I think he understood the reality of Florida. That being said, his administration and what he did just basically sucked the life out of the capital city. And their 4 pillars of this town, I think, are about ready to be revitalized. I think number 1, the lobby core is absolutely ready to be revitalized, and that is a big economic generator. Lobbyists, have you ever watched a lobbyist Facebook page? Those people have the best hobbies because they've got all this money running around. They're all going for private plane lessons. They're all like falconeers. They're all expert skiers. They're world-class fishermen. And I'm just talking about John Johnson. These guys are amazing. They all own a piece of a restaurant. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And so they are great economic generators in their own right. But under Scott, there was only 4 or 5 go-to lobbyists, not named Fred Karlinski, who he would speak with. And you didn't get in the door to him if you did not have a check from Energy Company X. I don't want to insult any one of my advertisers, but any Energy Company X that had a check for $100,000. Not that Charlie Crist was any better at that, but $10,000 would get you in the door with Charlie as opposed to $100,000. The lobby corps wants a fair and balanced playing field. They want to know that they can go to the executive branch and be heard. They want to be able to go back to their clients and say, hey, listen, I met with the ACA undersecretary or whatever, and I had my say. That's how this business works. Scott just didn't have that. And the reason why is because Rick Scott could write his own check. There was nothing worse for Florida politics than Rick Scott's checkbook. His ability to write a $73 million check in 2010, another $14 million in the last couple of days in 2014, and then whatever he spent against Nelson in 2018, that made him, whereas it made him beholden to no one. And it was like Caesar, he was a colossus bestriding the city. And so the lobby corps didn't need him. The second pillar, the fundraisers, absolutely did not need him. There's a lot of people in this town that make their bones on being able to raise money for people. And unfortunately, he broke up the whole system of fundraising so that the only thing that mattered was a six-figure check. Fundraisers make their bones on the $1,000 checks, on being able to get 10 people to give 1,000 rather than one person being able to give 10,000. That's how the grease that makes this entire system work here. He broke that. He broke the media. He absolutely broke the media. The way that Rick Scott worked was they would put out a press release to the Associated Press rather than to Politico or to Florida Politics, because they knew we would not editorialize on it. We would not say that the latest Scott plan was bad or good. They would take that, they would release it to Gary Fineout. Fineout would write it up, and then the lazy television stations in little crappy towns around Florida, of which there are a lot, basically regurgitated Gary's story. At that point, at which point the governor's office would put out a press release saying, in case you missed it, here's the story from Wink News about the press release we put out here. And it was this little vicious cycle of misinformation. There was never any of these stories. Like, think about all that we've known about, especially with the Mueller report now showing that they were basically true. I don't want to get into that, but I'm just the reporting of the Times and the Post on the inside, all those TikToks, all those fly-on-the-wall stories. Those were true. We had none of that with Scott. Now, some people might say that that was really good, that there were no leaks, but we had no insights into how the man thought. There was no Sunday story with Rick Scott's advisors struggle to come up with idea to solve crisis X. There was none of that. There was none of that reporting. It was broken. Now, there was some great, I don't want you to think that I don't think that there isn't some great enterprise reporting, right now by the Miami Herald. They were finalists, or did they win a Pulitzer? And then the Sun Sentinel on Parkland, etc. Newspapers are great at being magazines right now. They are great at doing big picture stuff that unfortunately falls in a forest and only gets read one time, and they only get the traffic for on a limited basis. And so I don't want you to think like that in my neck of the woods, the Tampa Bay Times just did an incredible expose on dying kids at All Children's Hospital. They will save little babies' hearts. It's worth them doing that. But day-to-day beat reporting about the minutia of what goes on in Tallahassee, I think that they suffer from. And then the fourth pillar, Rick Scott broke the Republican Party. He made it as obsolete as it had ever been. It was on a downward trend. Ever since DJ left, it's never been as good. But they broke. It had been on a downward trend since Jim Greer basically pilfered the place. But when he decided to move the money out of the political committee and set up his own shop and raise money for that, he basically gutted the Republican Party, and it was at its smallest staff level. We don't know what was really going on there, but there's talk about the National Party having to infuse the money into there. We need vibrant political parties. We need them to register voters. We need them to turn out voters. We need them so that they act as a counterbalance to any one politician, any one part of their party being so dominant that the rest of the party can get started. I won't even mention the Florida Democratic Party, because if there is any political equivalent of the Washington Generals, I don't know what is. It is. You got to look at these folks, and this is. I know some of you all want me to come up here and complain about Republicans, and I can and I will. I'm not the biggest fan of Jose Oliva. I'm not the biggest fan of some of these guys up there, and they're complaining and everything like that. But you got to remember, in 2016, not one single House Republican incumbent, of which there were, I think, over 70, not one of them lost. So put this in perspective. The biggest story, according to the AP that year, was about the legislature gaveling out early. This is when Steve Christofoli was speaker, and everything's falling apart, and the world is ending because they can't get that budget signed. That was, according to the AP, the number one story for the year. And then the number two story was they can't get those lines redistricted. Damn it, we got to go to the courts, we got to do all this. They're drawing unfair lines, the Republicans are horrible, they're trying to steal elections. And what did the voters say to that? The voters really took it out on the Republicans by, well, they did it. They said, every single one of you who were up there, we want you to go back. And then in 2018, the Democrats finally got their lines. They're hoping, yay, we finally got lines drawn for the way we wanted. Our good Barbara Pariente and all the liberal activists dressed in black robes, we finally got lines where we can win some Senate races. And there's going to be 6 competitive Senate districts on the ballot in 2018. And we've got one in South Florida, and we've got one in Pinellas, where we know we're going to win, and we've recruited really good candidates, and all those things that those evil Republicans are doing, not expanding Medicaid, and people hate Trump, and there's this whole blue wave happening everywhere. And you know what happened? They all lost but one, and the one that did win went to recount. And so, as much as the people in this room, who I'd like to close with by insulting all of you all, you are the urban liberal intelligentsia. You are the people who think that, you know what, I really like Bernie. I really like him. I like what he has to say with Medicare for all. I don't care if Gwen Graham is more electable. Now, I know you folks didn't go with Gillum, but the other tiger base around the state. We're going to go for that progressive candidate because he speaks to what we believe. We don't care. We don't care about electability. We want Bernie. We want Gillum. And then what happens? Lucy pulls back the football on you all again and again and again, and Democrats get up here and they complain, and so that's why they're complaining right now. The issues that I got brought up for, Jeff's like, wow, we did not bring you up here to just piss in all of our Cheerios today. Brought me up for Amendment 4. We brought you up to talk about the initiative process. It's important. We'll close on this. This is the it doesn't feel like it, but this is the Republicans at the end of their majority. And they can feel it. They're looking at the demographics, and they're seeing a lot of people with the last names that have S's and Z's in them, and they're moving to places in Central Florida, and they're like, man, how do we hang on to this majority that we have built over the last 24 years? How do we do that? Now, I don't get the stupidity of trying to change the amendment and petition gathering process. Do you know who came up with the petition and amendment gathering process? You know why that was created? That was created by Republicans in California to block tax increases, to implement term limits. And so, as my good friend John Sawinski, who is a big petition gathering guru, he and I were talking right beforehand. I was looking at the notes. So it's kind of interesting. One of the things that Jamie Grant, who is a friend, but you know, he also roots for Auburn, so he's wrong a lot. He's the one pushing this bill, and he is saying, well, on every amendment, we need to have it marked off the percentage of out-of-state contributors who have donated to such and such amendment. Over 90% of the donors to Jamie Grant come from outside of his district. I would suggest to Jamie Grant that if he wants to put his little thing on about initiatives, that we should have a mark on next to his name on how many dollars come from outside of his district. Here's the other thing on this stupid idea to raise the threshold from 60%, 40% to 66%, 33%. As we all know, we just got done with 3 statewide elections that went to recount or whatever, where people won by a few thousand votes. Think about the margin that you had to have. We don't say this enough. For a ballot initiative to have passed in 2018, it had to have gotten 1.6 million more votes than no. Think about that. You got a governor elected by less than 100,000 votes. You have a senator elected by less than 100,000 votes. You have an agriculture commissioner who was losing on election night. And yet we're going to switch to a system where the winners were getting 1.6 million more votes than the people were saying no. And here's the other stupid thing about Jamie Grant's proposals. You know who put those initiatives up on the Constitutional Revision Commission? Let me tell you something. The CRC was not a bunch of Democrats. Carlos Baruf, who was the chairman, he ran for the Republican nomination for the US Senate. These were all Republicans putting them on. And here's what Jamie Grant doesn't realize. 2020, 2022, those margins are going to flip one of those days. They have to flip. They have to flip. And he is going to want, and his colleagues are going to want, to get their initiatives on there because, boy, when the Democrats do come back to power, you want to talk about Medicare for all and Medicare expanded and all of the crazy initiatives that have been bottled up for 24 years. They are going to want to do something, and it's going to come through the initiative process. And so I think it's very dangerous, the short memory that Jamie Grant and some of his colleagues have right now. I will be happy to take any of your questions. Thank you very much for listening to me rant about everybody.